The fluorescent lights in the courthouse hallway buzzed like dying insects, casting a sickly yellow glow over everything they touched. I pressed my back against the cold concrete wall, trying to make myself smaller, invisible. A skill I'd perfected over the 3 years I'd spent married to Marcus Webb. The manila folder in my hands trembled, pages of hastily printed documents threatening to spill onto the scuffed linoleum floor. Around me, people moved with purpose. Lawyers in expensive suits, their shoes clicking confidently against the floor, couples whispering urgently with their legal representatives, clerks rushing between courtrooms with arms full of files. I had none of that. No lawyer. No support system. No one. The smell of burnt coffee drifted from a nearby vending machine, mixing with the antiseptic scent of industrial cleaner and the faint mustiness of old law books. My stomach churned, empty except for the anxiety that had taken up permanent residence there. I'd sold my mother's wedding ring, the only thing of value I'd managed to hide from Marcus, just to cover this month's rent for the tiny studio apartment I'd fled to 6 months ago. There was nothing left for a lawyer. Barely anything left for food. Well, well, well. The voice slithered down the hallway before I saw him. Marcus. If it isn't my darling wife. I forced myself to look up, to meet those pale blue eyes that had once seemed kind, before I'd learned what lived behind them. He stood 15 feet away, flanked by a man in a charcoal gray suit, who could only be his attorney. Marcus looked good. He always did. Expensive navy suit, perfectly styled dark hair, that smile that had fooled me into thinking I was safe. Behind them, I caught a glimpse of her. Veronica. Blonde, polished, already wearing what looked like an engagement ring, despite the fact that Marcus and I weren't even divorced yet. Marcus. My voice came out smaller than I'd intended. I cleared my throat, straightened my spine. I was wearing my only decent outfit, a simple black dress I'd bought at a thrift store, paired with shoes that pinched my toes, but looked professional enough. Next to Veronica's designer ensemble, I might as well have been wearing rags. He moved closer, and I caught the scent of his cologne. Cedar, and something sharp that used to make me feel protected, but now only made my skin crawl. His lawyer hung back, checking his phone with the bored expression of someone who'd seen 1,000 divorce cases and knew exactly how this one would end. I have to admit, Marcus said, loud enough that several people in the hallway turned to look. I'm almost impressed you showed up. Where's your lawyer, sweetheart? Or did you finally realize you can't afford one? Heat crept up my neck, flooding my cheeks. I'm representing myself. His laugh was sharp, cutting. Oh, this is going to be entertaining. David, he gestured to his attorney, is one of the best divorce lawyers in the state. Yale educated, 20 years of experience. And you. What? You watched some legal dramas on TV? Did some Google searches? I know my rights, I said, hating how defensive I sounded. How small. Your rights? Marcus stepped even closer, invading my space the way he always had, using his height to intimidate. Let me tell you about your rights, Claire. You get nothing. The prenup you signed? The one my lawyer is going to waive in front of the judge. Make sure of that. You walked away from our marriage, abandoned the marital home. You'll be lucky if I don't sue you for the money you stole from our joint account. I didn't steal anything. That was my money too. I earned... You earned? He cut me off, his voice dripping with contempt. You worked part-time at a bookstore, Claire. I paid for everything. The house, the cars, the vacations, every piece of clothing on your ungrateful back. And this is how you repay me, by dragging me to court. I wanted to scream that I'd left, because I'd been afraid. Because his temper had gotten worse. Because the night he'd put his hand around my throat and squeezed until black dots danced in my vision, I'd realized I was either going to leave or end up in a morgue. But we were in public, and Marcus was good at public. He saved his monsters for private moments. The prenup is ironclad. David, the lawyer, spoke up for the first time, his tone bored and matter-of-fact. I've reviewed it personally. Mrs. Webb signed it of her own free will, with full disclosure of Mr. Webb's assets. She's entitled to nothing in this divorce. I was 22, I whispered. I didn't understand what I was signing. Ignorance isn't a defense, David replied, already turning away. Judge Morrison doesn't tolerate people wasting the court's time. I suggest you withdraw your petition and save yourself the embarrassment. Marcus leaned in, his breath hot against my ear. You should have stayed, Claire. You were safe with me. Now look at you. Broke, alone, about to be humiliated in front of a courtroom full of people. Was it worth it? Was your pride worth this? My hands clenched around the folder, nails digging into the cheap cardboard. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and bolt down that hallway, out of this building, away from Marcus and his smug smile and the future that was about to crush me. But I'd run before. Run from my dying mother's hospital room because I couldn't watch her fade. Run from my childhood home because the memories hurt too much. Run straight into Marcus's arms because he'd seemed like salvation. I was done running. I'll see you in court, I said quietly. Marcus's expression hardened. Yes, you will. And everyone there will watch you lose. He walked away, Veronica linking her arm through his, the two of them looking like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread. David followed, already on his phone, probably discussing his next case because this one was such a sure thing. I sagged against the wall, letting out a shaky breath. My eyes burned with unshed tears, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not where Marcus might see. Divorce court, 3rd floor, a clerk called out, propping open a nearby courtroom door. Judge Morrison presiding. All parties for the 10 o'clock docket. Please proceed inside. My legs felt like water, but I forced them to move. One step, then another. The courtroom doors loomed ahead, heavy oak that had probably witnessed 1,000 people's worst days. I joined the stream of people filing inside, finding a seat in the gallery near the back. The courtroom was exactly what I'd expected from the movies. Wood paneling, an American flag hanging limply in the corner, rows of benches that reminded me uncomfortably of church pews. The judge's bench stood elevated at the front, imposing and empty. Marcus and his legal team sat at one of the 2 tables near the front, looking perfectly at ease. I clutched my folder and tried to remember everything I'd rehearsed, all the arguments I'd practiced in my bathroom mirror at 3 a.m. when sleep refused to come. The room filled slowly, other couples with their attorneys, a few court reporters, some people who looked like they were here to observe for law school or boredom. I felt exposed, sitting alone while everyone else seemed to have backup, support, someone who knew what the hell they were doing. The door at the back of the courtroom opened again. I didn't look up at first, too focused on trying to calm my racing heart. But something changed in the air, a shift. The quiet conversations around me stuttered and stopped. Even Marcus turned in his seat, his expression morphing from smug confidence to something else. Something I'd never seen on his face before. Confusion. And underneath it, a thread of fear. I lifted my eyes and felt my breath catch. 3 men had entered the courtroom. No, not just men. The 2 flanking the doorway were massive, built like professional bodyguards, wearing dark suits that couldn't quite hide the bulk of their frames. Their eyes scanned the room with the kind of awareness that screamed security detail, military training, danger. But it was the man between them who commanded every particle of attention in that room. He moved like liquid shadow, each step deliberate and controlled. His suit was black, not the standard lawyer black, but something darker, richer, like it had been woven from midnight itself. It fit him perfectly, custom-tailored to a body that suggested both power and grace. Dark hair, touched with silver at the temples, swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked like it could cut glass, and eyes. Even from across the room, I could see them. Dark, bottomless, ancient. He was perhaps in his early 40s, but he carried himself with the weight of someone who'd lived 1,000 years. Power radiated from him like heat from a fire, not the borrowed power of money or position, but something fundamental, something earned in blood and shadow. The whispers started immediately. Is that... It can't be. What's he doing here? The man's gaze swept the courtroom with casual dominance, assessing, cataloging, dismissing. His expression revealed nothing, no emotion, no humanity. Just a cold calculation that made my skin prickle with awareness. One of his guards held a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my car had before Marcus had forced me to sign it over to him. And then, impossibly, those dark eyes found mine. The world contracted to that single point of connection. His gaze locked onto me with the precision of a predator spotting prey, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare back. Something flickered in those depths. Recognition? No, that was impossible. I'd never seen this man before in my life. I would have remembered. You didn't forget a man like this. Time stretched, suspended in amber. Then he moved, and it was toward me. His guards shifted with him, a choreographed dance they'd performed 1,000 times. People in the gallery actually leaned back as he passed, like his presence alone was enough to push them away. The air around him carried the scent of expensive cologne, something with notes of leather and smoke and spice, mixed with something else, something darker that I couldn't name. Marcus had half risen from his seat, his face pale. David, the lawyer, looked like he'd seen a ghost. The man stopped at my row. This close, he was even more overwhelming. Easily over 6 feet, broad-shouldered, with a presence that made the air feel thicker. His eyes, now that I could see them properly, weren't just dark. They were obsidian. Flecks of what might have been gold caught the fluorescent light, giving them an almost predatory gleam. Mrs. Webb. His voice was deep, measured, with the faintest trace of an accent I couldn't place. European, maybe. Eastern. It rolled through the room like distant thunder. My name in his mouth sounded like a secret. My voice cracked. I swallowed hard. Yes? One corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile on someone else. On him, it looked like a promise of violence. I believe you're in need of legal representation. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the clerk who'd been shuffling papers had frozen, staring. How did you... The words tangled on my tongue. Nothing made sense. Who was this man? How did he know my name? Why was everyone looking at him like he'd brought the apocalypse into Judge Morrison's courtroom? He reached into his jacket, a movement that made both his guards tense infinitesimally, and produced a business card. Heavy cardstock. The kind that cost a fortune for no reason except to prove you could afford it. He held it out to me between 2 fingers. I took it with trembling hands. The card was simple, elegant, embossed with letters that caught the light. Konstantin Volkov, private legal consultation, and underneath, in smaller text, some debts must be paid. Some promises must be kept. I don't understand, I whispered. You will. He didn't elaborate. Instead, he turned to address the room at large, his voice carrying effortlessly. I will be representing Mrs. Webb in these proceedings. All communications should go through me. Marcus found his voice. What the hell is this? Who are you? Konstantin Volkov didn't even look at him. It was the most devastating dismissal I'd ever witnessed. To be so thoroughly beneath someone's notice that they wouldn't dignify you with a glance. Your attorney knows who I am, Konstantin said calmly. Don't you, David? David had gone from pale to gray. He looked like he might actually be sick. Mr. Volkov, This is highly irregular. Is it? Konstantin's tone suggested he couldn't care less about irregularity. Mrs. Webb requires representation. I'm providing it. I assume you have no legal objection? David's mouth opened and closed. Whatever he'd been about to say died unuttered. Good. Konstantin gestured to one of his guards, who immediately produced a slim folder from the briefcase. I'll need a few moments to confer with my client. I trust the court can accommodate a brief delay? It wasn't really a question. The clerk nodded mutely and disappeared through a side door, presumably to inform Judge Morrison of the development. Konstantin turned back to me, and suddenly his guards had positioned themselves to create a small bubble of privacy, blocking us from the rest of the courtroom's view. He sat down in the seat next to mine with fluid grace, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Mr. Volkov, you can't afford not to accept my representation. He cut me off, but his tone wasn't unkind, just absolute. Your husband has made a very serious mistake, Mrs. Webb. I don't understand what's happening. My voice came out small, frightened. I don't know you. Why would you help me? For the first time, something that might have been emotion flickered across his face. He studied me for a long moment, those dark eyes seeing far more than I was comfortable with. Your father, he said finally quietly, did me a great service once, a long time ago. I don't forget my debts, Mrs. Webb. And I certainly don't abandon the daughter of a man who saved my life to the mercy of... He glanced toward Marcus with barely concealed contempt. That. My father. The words hit me like a physical blow. My father died when I was 7. Yes. Something ancient and sad moved in his eyes. I know. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I was... elsewhere. But I made him a promise before he died. And I keep my promises. What promise? Constantine reached out, and before I could flinch away, his hand covered mine where it gripped the armrest. His touch was warm, solid, absolutely certain. That if his daughter ever needed protection, I would provide it. Always, no matter what. The courtroom door opened. All rise. The clerk called out. The Honorable Judge Morrison presiding. Constantine stood, releasing my hand, and I felt the loss of his warmth like a physical thing. He offered me his hand to help me up, and I took it, letting him pull me to my feet. As Judge Morrison entered and took her seat, Constantine leaned down to whisper in my ear, his breath stirring my hair. Trust me, Claire. By the time we're done here, your husband will wish he'd never heard your name. And despite everything, despite my confusion and fear and the sheer impossibility of this entire situation, I believed him. Judge Morrison was a woman in her late 50s, with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun and glasses that perched on her nose like a bird of prey. She surveyed her courtroom with the expression of someone who'd seen every trick, every lie, every desperate gambit that desperate people could conjure. Her gaze lingered on Constantine for a fraction longer than anyone else, and I saw something I didn't expect, recognition, followed immediately by wariness. Everyone knew who this man was. Everyone except me. Counsel, please approach and state your appearances for the record, Judge Morrison said, her voice crisp and professional, but I caught the slight tension in her shoulders. David stood immediately, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. David Fitzgerald for the petitioner. Marcus Webb, Your Honor. Constantine rose with that same liquid grace, and somehow the simple act of standing commanded more attention than David's entire presentation. Constantine Volkov for the respondent. Claire Webb, Your Honor. Judge Morrison's eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly. Mr. Volkov, I wasn't aware you practiced family law. I practice whatever law my clients require, Your Honor. His tone was respectful but firm, leaving no room for challenge. I've submitted my appearance paperwork with the clerk. Everything is in order. She studied him for another moment, then nodded. Very well. Mr. Fitzgerald, I believe you filed the petition. Please proceed. David launched into his opening statement with the confidence of a man who'd already won. He painted Marcus as the perfect husband, successful, generous, devoted, who'd been blindsided when his ungrateful wife abandoned their marriage. He emphasized the prenuptial agreement, waving the document like a battle flag, detailing how I'd signed it willingly, with full disclosure, and how it clearly stated I was entitled to nothing from Marcus's considerable assets. I sat at the respondent's table. Constantine had guided me there with a hand at the small of my back, a touch that somehow felt both protective and possessive, and tried not to let David's words carve me into smaller and smaller pieces. He made me sound like a gold digger, a woman who'd married for money and then tried to take even more when she'd failed to appreciate what she had. Through it all, Constantine sat perfectly still beside me, his hands folded on the table, his expression revealing nothing, but I could feel the coiled tension in him, like a great cat waiting to spring. One of his guards had positioned himself near the courtroom door, the other near the gallery, watching, always watching. Marcus sat at the petitioner's table looking smug, occasionally whispering to Veronica, who'd taken a seat directly behind him in the gallery. She looked at me with barely concealed contempt, her perfectly manicured hand resting possessively on Marcus's shoulder whenever she got the chance. In conclusion, Your Honor, David said, This is a straightforward case. The prenuptial agreement is valid and enforceable. Mrs. Webb is attempting to contest it based on nothing more than buyer's remorse. We ask that the court enforce the agreement as written and grant Mr. Webb his petition for divorce with no financial obligation to the respondent. He sat down with the satisfied air of someone who'd just delivered a closing argument in a slam-dunk case. Judge Morrison turned to our table. Mr. Volkov? Constantine stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees. He didn't rush to the podium. He moved with deliberate slowness, giving everyone time to feel the weight of his presence. When he finally turned to face the judge, his hands were relaxed at his sides, his posture perfect. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the courtroom, "my colleague has presented a very tidy narrative. Unfortunately for him, it bears little resemblance to the truth." David shifted in his seat, his confidence flickering. "The prenuptial agreement, Mr. Fitzgerald is so eager to enforce was signed by my client when she was 22 years old, grieving the recent loss of her mother, and presented to her less than 48 hours before her wedding." Constantine pulled a document from the folder his guard had handed him. "I have here the original timeline, including emails from Mr. Webb's previous attorney, noting that the timing was less than ideal, but that Mr. Webb insisted on proceeding." He placed the document on the judge's bench with a decisive motion. "My client was told that if she didn't sign, the wedding would be canceled. She was emotionally vulnerable, financially dependent, and desperate not to lose what she believed was her only source of stability after her mother's death. That, Your Honor, is duress, and contracts signed under duress are not enforceable." David shot to his feet. "Objection. There's no evidence of duress. Mrs. Webb had the opportunity to consult her own attorney, did she?" Constantine's voice cut through the objection like a blade through silk. He turned to face David directly, and I saw the other lawyer actually take a step back. "According to the records, my client was told she could have an attorney review the document. What she wasn't told is that Mr. Webb's attorney had already contacted the only family law attorney in her small hometown and convinced him not to take her case due to a conflict of interest that, curiously, no one can now seem to identify." He produced another document. "I have the phone records showing multiple calls between Mr. Webb's previous counsel and attorney Robert Morrison, no relation to Your Honor, in the 3 days before the wedding. I also have a signed affidavit from Mr. Sen Morrison admitting that he declined to meet with Claire Webb at David Fitzgerald's request, though at the time he was told it was to avoid complications, not because of any legitimate conflict." The judge's expression had shifted from neutral to interested. She took the document Constantine offered, scanning it quickly. Marcus had gone pale. He leaned over to whisper urgently to David, who looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. "Furthermore," Constantine continued, turning back to Judge Morrison, "the prenuptial agreement itself contains several provisions that are unconscionable under state law. It strips my client of any right to marital property, despite the fact that she contributed to the household and supported Mr. Webb's career advancement during their marriage. It contains a clause requiring her to waive all rights to spousal support, even in cases of domestic violence." He paused, letting that last phrase hang in the air. "Domestic violence?" Judge Morrison's tone sharpened. "Mr. Volkov, are you alleging abuse?" "I'm stating facts, Your Honor." Constantine's voice remained calm, controlled. "I have medical records showing that Mrs. Webb visited the emergency room twice during her marriage. Once for a fall down the stairs that resulted in bruised ribs, once for a kitchen accident that left her with a concussion and a fractured wrist." He placed photographs on the judge's bench. I recognized them, realized with a sickening jolt that somehow he'd obtained my medical files. The pictures showed my injuries in stark, clinical detail. The bruises that had taken weeks to fade, the way my left eye had swollen shut, the purple and yellow staining my ribs like paint. I'd told the doctors I was clumsy. They'd looked at me with knowing eyes, but written down what I said because that's what victims do. We protect our abusers until we can't anymore. I also have testimony from neighbors who reported hearing screaming from the Webb residence on multiple occasions. Police were called twice, though no charges were filed because Mrs. Webb was too frightened to press them. Marcus was on his feet. "This is slander. I never—" "Sit down, Mr. Webb," Judge Morrison said sharply. You'll have your chance to respond. But I could see it in her face now. The shift. The reassessment. She was looking at Marcus differently, and he knew it. Constantine wasn't finished. The prenuptial agreement Mr. Fitzgerald wants to enforce also contains a clause stating that if Mrs. Webb leaves the marriage for any reason, she must pay Mr. Webb $50,000 for emotional damages. This is not only unconscionable, it's effectively a financial penalty designed to keep my client trapped in an abusive marriage. He turned to look at Marcus then, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold. It was hatred, pure and simple, but controlled with an iron will. Your Honor, this isn't a divorce case. It's an escape. My client didn't abandon her marriage. She fled for her life. And now her abuser wants to use the legal system to punish her for having the courage to survive. The courtroom had gone absolutely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her hands frozen over the keys. Judge Morrison removed her glasses, cleaning them with deliberate slowness while she processed everything she'd heard. When she put them back on, her expression was carved from granite. Mr. Fitzgerald, do you have any response to these allegations? David stood, but his earlier confidence had evaporated. Your Honor, we were not aware of any allegations of domestic violence. Mr. Webb has maintained that the marriage ended due to irreconcilable differences. Irreconcilable differences, Constantine interjected smoothly, being Mr. Webb's fists and my client's face. Mr. Volkov, Judge Morrison said, but there was no real censure in her tone. She turned back to David. I'm inclined to agree with counsel that this prenuptial agreement is deeply problematic. The timing, the lack of independent counsel, the unconscionable provisions. Any one of these would give me pause. Together, they paint a picture of a document designed not to protect assets, but to control a vulnerable young woman. Marcus's face had gone from pale to red. This is bullshit. She's lying. Mr. Webb, I will hold you in contempt if you speak again without being recognized. Judge Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. She turned to David. Does your client have any evidence to refute the medical records, the police reports, or the witness statements? David shuffled through his papers, but I could see the answer in his slumped shoulders. We would need time to review. Time, Mr. Webb was not willing to give my client when he had her served with divorce papers at her place of employment, in front of her colleagues, designed to maximize her humiliation, Constantine added. Time he was not willing to give when he froze their joint bank accounts, leaving her with no access to money she had earned. Time he was not willing to give when he had building security bar her from retrieving her personal belongings from their apartment. Each statement was a hammer blow, and I watched Marcus crumple under them. Veronica had removed her hand from his shoulder, shifting slightly away, as if his guilt might be contagious. Judge Morrison gathered her papers. I'm going to take a 30-minute recess to review these documents more thoroughly. When we return, I'll hear testimony from both parties. Mr. Webb, I strongly suggest you consult with your attorney about the wisdom of proceeding with this petition as filed. She stood, and everyone rose automatically as she exited through the door behind her bench. The moment she was gone, the courtroom erupted in whispers. Marcus rounded on David, hissing something I couldn't hear. Veronica looked like she was reconsidering every life choice that had led her to this moment. Constantine's guards maintained their positions, stone-faced and vigilant, and Constantine turned to me. Come, he said quietly, gesturing toward a door marked conference room. We need to talk. I followed him on trembling legs, his guards creating a path through the gallery. People stared, not just at him, but at me now too. The woman who'd walked in alone and terrified, and was now under the protection of whoever this man really was. The conference room was small, sterile, with a table and 4 chairs. Constantine held the door for me, then closed it behind us, leaving his guards outside. Suddenly we were alone, and the space felt even smaller with him in it. How did you get those records? My voice came out shaky. The medical files, the police reports, those are private. I have resources. He didn't elaborate. He pulled out a chair for me, waiting until I sat before taking the seat across from me. Claire, I need you to understand something. This is just the beginning. The beginning of what? The truth. He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "Your husband is not just an abusive man with money. He's connected to people who make him look like a saint. People I've had dealings with in the past." A chill ran down my spine. What kind of dealings? The kind that ensure I know exactly who Marcus Webb really is. His jaw tightened. 3 years ago, he was involved in a money laundering scheme with an organization I have a complicated history with. He used his position at his firm to move dirty money. When the deal went south, he blamed one of their associates, a young man named Alexei Petrov. The name meant nothing to me, but the way Konstantin said it, with barely suppressed rage, told me everything I needed to know. Alexei was 24. He had a wife, a baby daughter. Because of your husband's lies, because of his cowardice, Alexei was killed. His family was left with nothing. Konstantin's hands had formed fists on the table. I've been watching Marcus Webb ever since, waiting for the right moment to make him pay for what he did. And I'm that moment? The words came out bitter, sharp. You're not here to help me. You're here to get revenge on Marcus. I'm here to do both. His voice was firm, absolute. You needed help. I needed justice. This way, everyone gets what they deserve. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to feel used, manipulated. But as I looked at this powerful, dangerous man who'd walked into that courtroom like he owned it, who'd dismantled Marcus's perfect case in minutes, who'd spoken about my injuries with a barely controlled fury that suggested he'd like nothing more than to make Marcus feel every bit of pain he'd inflicted on me, I couldn't muster outrage. What happens now? I asked quietly. Now, Marcus realizes he's made a catastrophic mistake. Now, he understands that you're not alone anymore. That you have protection he can't fight, resources he can't match, and someone who knows every dirty secret he's tried to bury. Konstantin reached across the table, his hand covering mine again. Now, Claire, you win. And Marcus Webb learns what it means to be powerless. His touch was warm, solid, grounding. I turned my hand over, palm to palm with his, and felt something shift between us. Something dangerous and complicated, and absolutely terrifying. "Why did my father save your life?" I whispered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That's a story for another time. But I will tell you this. He was a good man, a brave man, and he loved you more than anything in this world. The last thing he asked me was to watch over you if anything ever happened to him. But you didn't. I didn't mean it as an accusation, just a statement of fact. I couldn't find you." Pain flickered across his features. "You disappeared after your mother died. Changed your name when you married. By the time I located you, you were already married to that monster. I was going to approach you, to offer help. But then..." He paused. "I saw you smile at him. You looked happy. I thought maybe I was wrong, maybe he was different with you, so I watched. And I waited. And I hated myself every day for not acting sooner." There was something in his voice, guilt, genuine and raw, that made my chest tighten. "You're here now," I said. Yes, his grip on my hand tightened almost imperceptibly, and I won't make the mistake of staying away again. A knock on the door interrupted us. One of Konstantin's guards, the slightly shorter one with a scar above his left eyebrow, opened the door a crack. "They're reconvening in 5 minutes. Konstantin nodded, then turned back to me. "Are you ready?" I thought about Marcus, about the years of fear, the way he'd made me feel small and worthless and trapped. I thought about walking into that courtroom alone, convinced I was going to lose everything, and I thought about this man, this dark, dangerous, impossible man, who'd appeared like something out of a dream, and torn apart Marcus's carefully constructed lies. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." We stood, and as we moved toward the door, Konstantin's hand found the small of my back again, that possessive, protective touch that made me feel simultaneously safe and claimed. Like I'd traded one form of captivity for another, but this time, the cage felt like it might have been built to keep the monsters out instead of keeping me in. The courtroom felt different when we returned. The air crackled with tension, thick enough to choke on. Marcus sat hunched at his table, David whispering urgently in his ear, while Veronica had moved back several rows in the gallery, putting distance between herself and the sinking ship. I caught her eye as I passed, and she looked away quickly, her perfectly painted face tight with something that looked like fear. Judge Morrison entered with the same stern expression, but I noticed she looked at Marcus differently now, like he was something distasteful she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "We'll proceed with testimony," she announced, settling into her chair. "Mr. Webb, I'd like to hear your version of events. Please take the stand." Marcus stood, adjusting his tie with hands that weren't quite steady. He crossed to the witness box, was sworn in, and sat down with manufactured confidence. But I'd lived with him for 3 years. I knew his tells. The way his left eye twitched when he was cornered. The slight tremor in his jaw when he was preparing to lie. David led him through what should have been a sympathetic narrative. Marcus painted himself as the devoted husband, shocked when I'd suddenly left without explanation. He claimed he'd never raised a hand to me, that my injuries had been accidents, clumsy falls, mishaps in our admittedly chaotic household. His voice was smooth, practiced, the same voice he'd used to convince me to marry him, to sign that prenup, to believe that the bruises were my own fault. "Mr. Webb," David said, "did you ever prevent your wife from leaving the marriage?" "Never. I loved Claire. I wanted her to be happy. When she left, I was devastated." He looked directly at me, his eyes pleading. "I still love her. This divorce isn't what I want, it's what she insisted on. I'm only trying to protect my assets. Assets I built long before we met. It was a good performance. It might have even worked if Constantine hadn't systematically demolished his credibility before we'd even started." Judge Morrison looked unimpressed. "Mr. Volkov, your witness." Constantine rose, and I watched Marcus's facade crack. Just slightly. Just enough. "Mr. Webb," Constantine began, his voice deceptively mild, "you testified that you never prevented your wife from leaving. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And yet you had the locks changed on your apartment the day after she left, didn't you?" Marcus shifted. "For security purposes. Security." Constantine pulled out yet another document. "Where did he get all of these?" "According to the building's security logs, you also had Claire Webb's name removed from the approved resident list, had her key fob deactivated, and left instructions with the doorman that she was not to be allowed entry under any circumstances. Does that sound like the actions of a man who wanted his wife to come home?" I was hurt. Angry. I wasn't thinking clearly. "No, you were thinking very clearly. You were ensuring she couldn't retrieve any of her belongings without a police escort." Constantine moved closer to the witness box, each step deliberate. "You froze the joint bank accounts, leaving her with exactly $147 to her name. You canceled her credit cards. You even called her employer and suggested they terminate her, didn't you?" "That's not, I have the phone records, Mr. Webb." "A 12-minute call from your cell phone to the manager of Brighton Books on the day after your wife left. What were you discussing if not her employment?" Marcus's face had gone red. "I was concerned about her mental state. I thought she might be having a breakdown." "How considerate." Constantine's tone could have frozen fire. "Let's talk about her mental state. You testified that her injuries were accidents, clumsy falls. Let me read from the medical report from her emergency room visit on March 15th. He produced a paper, holding it up. "Multiple contusions on the upper arms consistent with gripping, bruising around the throat." The attending physician noted, and I quote, "Injuries consistent with manual strangulation. That's quite a fall, Mr. Webb. She bruises easily. I told you she's clumsy. She told the doctor you choked her until she lost consciousness." Constantine's voice cut through Marcus's stammering. "The only reason charges weren't filed is because she was too terrified to press them. Terrified of you." David was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is speculation." "It's in the medical record, Your Honor," Constantine said calmly. "The doctor's notes indicate Mrs. Webb disclosed the cause of her injuries, but refused to file a police report due to fear of retaliation." Judge Morrison's expression had gone cold. "Overruled. Continue, Mr. Volkov." Constantine turned back to Marcus. "Let's discuss Alexei Petrov." The color drained from Marcus's face so quickly I thought he might pass out. David's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "I don't know who that is," Marcus said. but his voice had gone thin, reedy. No? Konstantin pulled out a photograph, placed it on the judge's bench. Alexei Petrov, age 24, married to Natasha Petrova, father to a 6-month-old daughter. Worked as an accountant for Meridian Holdings until he was murdered 3 years ago, shot twice in the chest, and left in an alley near the docks. The courtroom had gone deathly silent. What does this have to do with my divorce? Marcus's voice cracked. Everything, Konstantin said softly, dangerously. Because Alexei Petrov worked with you, didn't he? On a very specific project involving the movement of funds that weren't quite legitimate? Your Honor, David practically shouted, this is completely irrelevant to the divorce proceedings. On the contrary, Konstantin said, never taking his eyes off Marcus. It's extremely relevant. It establishes Mr. Webb's character. It shows the court exactly what kind of man we're dealing with. A man who will lie, cheat, and destroy anyone who gets in his way. Marcus gripped the sides of the witness box, his knuckles white. I had nothing to do with what happened to Petrov. Nothing. If you're accusing me of... I'm not accusing you of murder, Mr. Webb. That would be foolish without proof. Konstantin's smile was razor-sharp. I'm simply noting that you were the last person to see Alexei Petrov alive, according to witness statements. That you had a very heated argument with him the day before his death, and that after he was killed, you were promoted to senior vice president and given a substantial bonus. Coincidence. Marcus spat. You can't prove anything. Perhaps not in a criminal court. Not yet. Konstantin let that hang in the air. But in this courtroom, I don't need to prove murder. I only need to prove that you're a violent, manipulative man who has built his life on lies and intimidation. And I believe I've done that quite effectively. Judge Morrison was watching the exchange with sharp attention. I could see her mind working, reassessing everything she thought she knew about this case. Konstantin returned to our table, sat down, and said quietly, "No further questions." David tried to salvage things on redirect, but the damage was done. Marcus's testimony had gone from confident to desperate, and everyone in that courtroom could see it. When he finally stepped down, he looked 10 years older, his expensive suit hanging on him like a costume that no longer fit. "Mrs. Webb," Judge Morrison said, "I'd like to hear from you." My legs felt like water as I stood. Konstantin's hand brushed mine as I passed. A brief touch, barely there, but it steadied me. I walked to the witness box, was sworn in, and sat down facing the courtroom, facing Marcus, who stared at me with something between hatred and desperation. David stood to question me, but his heart clearly wasn't in it anymore. He asked perfunctory questions about the marriage, about why I'd left, trying to paint me as unstable or vindictive. I answered honestly, my voice growing stronger with each question. Yes, I'd left suddenly, because I was afraid. Yes, I'd taken money from our joint account, because it was my money too, earned from my job, and I needed it to survive. Yes, I wanted a divorce, because I deserved to be free. When Konstantin stood to question me, his approach was gentle, coaxing out details I'd been too ashamed to share. The first time Marcus had hit me, a slap across the face when I'd burned dinner, followed immediately by tears and apologies and promises it would never happen again. The way the violence had escalated slowly. So gradually I'd barely noticed until I was trapped. The night he'd put his hands around my throat, and I'd seen my death in his eyes. "Why didn't you leave sooner?" Konstantin asked, his voice soft. "Because I had nowhere to go," I whispered. "No money, no family, no friends. He'd isolated me from everyone. And because part of me still believed him when he said he loved me, that he'd change, that I was the problem. And what changed? I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw him for what he was, not the charming man who'd swept me off my feet, not the husband I desperately wanted him to be. Just a small, cruel man who'd built his power on making others feel weak. I realized that if I stayed, I would die. I said. Either he would kill me, or I would stop being a person entirely. So I chose to live. Konstantin nodded slowly. "No further questions, Your Honor." When I returned to my seat, my hands were shaking. but it was different now. Not fear. Something closer to relief, like lancing a wound and finally letting the poison out. Judge Morrison took off her glasses, setting them on her desk with deliberate care. I've heard enough. I'm prepared to rule. The courtroom held its collective breath. First, regarding the prenuptial agreement, I find it unconscionable and unenforceable. The circumstances under which it was signed, the lack of independent counsel, and the punitive provisions all support this conclusion. The agreement is hereby declared invalid. Marcus made a sound like he'd been punched. Second, regarding the division of assets, I'm awarding Mrs. Webb 50% of all marital property, including the apartment, vehicles, and Mr. Webb's retirement accounts. She's also entitled to spousal support in the amount of $5,000 per month for a period of 5 years, to allow her to reestablish her independence. David started to object, but Judge Morrison held up a hand. Third, I'm granting a restraining order against Mr. Webb. He is not to contact Mrs. Webb directly or indirectly, not to come within 500 feet of her residence or place of employment, and not to make any disparaging statements about her to third parties. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. She looked directly at Marcus, and her expression was carved from ice. Mr. Webb, I want to be very clear. You came into my courtroom expecting to intimidate and financially destroy a vulnerable woman. Instead, you've exposed yourself as exactly the kind of person who makes me grateful I chose this profession. If I ever see you in my courtroom again, it had better be because you're facing criminal charges. Do you understand? Marcus nodded mutely, his face ashen. Court is adjourned. She brought down her gavel with a decisive crack. The courtroom erupted in whispers. I sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. I'd won. Not just won. I'd destroyed him. Everything he'd tried to take from me, everything he'd used to control me, it was gone. He had nothing left. Constantine's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. Congratulations, Claire. I turned to look at him, this dark, dangerous man who'd appeared out of nowhere and changed everything. Thank you doesn't seem adequate. Thank you isn't necessary. His thumb traced circles on my palm, a gesture that felt far more intimate than it should. I told you, I keep my promises. Marcus stormed past our table, David hurrying after him, trying to calm him down. Veronica had already disappeared, probably calculating how quickly she could distance herself from this disaster. People were staring at us, at me, with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity, and in some cases, fear. Because I wasn't just Claire Webb anymore, the woman who'd walked in alone and terrified. I was Claire Webb, the woman under Konstantin Volkov's protection, and apparently, that meant something. Something significant enough to make an entire courtroom hold its breath. What happens now? I asked quietly. Konstantin stood, pulling me up with him. His guards materialized at our sides, forming that protective barrier again. Now, we make sure Marcus understands that his loss today is just the beginning, that if he ever comes near you again, what happened in this courtroom will seem like mercy. There was something in his voice, a dark promise that made my skin prickle with awareness. This wasn't over. Not really. This was just the first battle in a war I hadn't known I was fighting. But as Konstantin guided me toward the courtroom doors, his hand warm and possessive at the small of my back, I realized something that should have terrified me. I didn't want it to be over. Not yet. The late afternoon sun slanted through the courthouse windows as we exited, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Konstantin's guards moved ahead, scanning the street with practiced efficiency, before one of them gestured that it was clear. A black SUV waited at the curb, windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside, the kind of vehicle that screamed money and power and don't even think about it. I can take a cab, I said, suddenly aware of how deep I was getting into whatever this was. You've already done so much, Claire. Konstantin's voice was gentle but firm. He'd stopped on the courthouse steps, turning to face me. The fading sunlight caught the silver at his temples, made his dark eyes look almost warm. Almost. Do you really think I'm going to let you walk away alone? After what just happened in there? Marcus wouldn't. Marcus is desperate, humiliated, and cornered. That makes him more dangerous than ever. His hand came up to my face, and I froze as his thumb brushed my cheekbone with unexpected tenderness. I made your father a promise. I intend to keep it. The guard with the scar opened the SUV's door, waiting. I looked at the vehicle, then at Constantine, then back at the courthouse where Marcus was probably still inside, plotting his next move. Okay, I whispered. Constantine's hand moved to the small of my back. I was beginning to recognize this gesture as signature to him, possessive and protective in equal measure, and guided me to the SUV. The interior was cream leather, immaculate, smelling of expensive cologne and something else. Danger, maybe. Power. He slid in beside me, and the door closed with a solid thunk that sounded like a bank vault ceiling. The guards took the front seats, and we pulled away from the curb with smooth precision. Where do you live? Constantine asked. I gave him the address of my studio apartment, feeling embarrassed. It was in a rough neighborhood, the kind of place where sirens were a nightly lullaby, and the lock on my door was more hope than security. Something flickered across his face. Concern, maybe, or disapproval. You've been living there for 6 months? It's what I could afford. I folded my hands in my lap, suddenly defensive. Not all of us have private security and armored vehicles. No. He studied me for a long moment, but you do now. I don't understand. I told you, Claire. I protect what's mine. He said it so casually, like he was discussing the weather, and you are under my protection until I'm satisfied that Marcus Webb no longer poses a threat. I'm not yours, I said. But the words came out uncertain. His smile was slow, dangerous. Aren't you? The SUV glided through traffic, and I watched the city pass by outside the tinted windows. People going about their lives, oblivious to the strange new reality I'd stumbled into. 24 hours ago, I'd been alone, terrified, convinced I was going to lose everything. Now I was sitting in a luxury vehicle next to a man who'd just dismantled my ex-husband's life with surgical precision. And I didn't even know what to call him. Savior? Protector? Captor? All of the above? Tell me about my father, I said quietly. Please. Constantine was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then finally, your father was a doctor. Did you know that? I nodded. He worked in emergency medicine. That's all I really remember. Him coming home late, smelling like hospitals. He saved my life when I was 26 years old. I'd been shot, left to die in an alley not unlike where Alexei Petrov was found. His voice went distant, remembering. Your father was walking home from his shift. He should have kept walking. I was nobody to him, just another piece of street trash, but he didn't. He stopped. He used his own supplies, his own hands, to keep me alive until the ambulance came. That sounds like him, I whispered. When I recovered, I went to find him, to thank him, to repay the debt. Constantine's jaw tightened. He refused money, refused gifts. He told me the only payment he wanted was for me to be a better man than the life I was living suggested. He said he'd saved me for a reason, and it was up to me to make that reason worthwhile. I could hear my father's voice in those words. The gentle idealism that had driven him to work double shifts, to volunteer at free clinics, to believe that everyone deserved a chance at redemption. Did you? I asked. Become a better man? I tried. His eyes met mine, and I saw something ancient and sad in them. I'm not a good man, Claire. I never will be. But I've tried to honor your father's faith in me. I built legitimate businesses alongside the other kind. I protected people who couldn't protect themselves. And I waited for the day when I could repay his kindness by protecting the thing he loved most. Me. You. The SUV turned onto my street, and I felt embarrassment flood through me. The buildings were run down, covered in graffiti, windows barred against break-ins. A group of men loitered on the corner, eyeing the luxury vehicle with predatory interest. Constantine's expression hardened. You're not staying here. I don't have anywhere else. You do now. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. I have a property downtown. Secure building doorman, 24-hour security. You'll move in tonight. I can't accept that. It's not a request, Claire. His voice had gone cold, commanding. Look around. This neighborhood isn't safe for anyone, let alone a woman alone who just made a powerful enemy. Marcus knows where you live. Do you really think he's going to accept what happened today? Do you think he's just going to let you walk away? Fear prickled down my spine. He was right, and I knew it. Marcus was vindictive when he was losing, when he'd been completely destroyed in public, had everything he valued stripped away. He would be dangerous. I'll pay you back, I said. The spousal support. I don't want your money. Constantine's hand found mine again. That touch that was becoming familiar. I want you safe. That's all. The SUV stopped in front of my building. The guard with the scar got out, scanning the area before opening my door. Pack everything you need, Constantine said. My men will help you. We're not staying longer than necessary. I wanted to argue, to assert some kind of independence, to prove I wasn't trading one cage for another, but the truth was, I was exhausted, bone-deep tired from years of fear, from the emotional warfare of the last few hours, from trying to be strong when I had nothing left to be strong with. Okay, I said. His expression softened fractionally. Good. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, accessed by a stairwell that smelled like urine and decay. I heard Constantine's sharp intake of breath as we climbed, saw his guards' hands drift toward their jackets where I suspected weapons were hidden. The lock on my door was flimsy, would barely keep out a determined child, let alone Marcus if he decided to visit. Inside, my studio was tiny but clean. I'd made it as homey as possible with secondhand furniture and plants on the windowsill. Books lined makeshift shelves. My one luxury, my escape. The bed was a futon that doubled as a couch. The kitchen was a hot plate and a mini fridge. Constantine looked around, and I saw something like fury flash across his face. You've been living like this for 6 months. It wasn't a question. It's not so bad, I said defensively. It's unacceptable. He turned to one of his guards. Pack everything, all of it. I want this place cleared in 30 minutes. That's not necessary. Claire. He crossed to me in 2 strides, taking my shoulders in his hands. His grip was firm but not painful, his dark eyes boring into mine. Stop fighting me. Stop trying to be strong when you don't have to be. I am offering you protection, safety, a chance to breathe without looking over your shoulder. Take it. There was something in his voice, a desperate edge that suggested this was about more than just honoring a promise to my dead father. This was personal. This was about something I didn't fully understand. Why? I whispered. Why does this matter so much to you? His hands tightened fractionally on my shoulders. For a moment, I thought he might actually answer. Then he released me, stepping back, that cold mask sliding into place again. Because I failed your father once. I won't fail you. He gestured to my belongings. Pack. We're leaving. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur. Constantine's guards were efficient, packing my clothes, my books, my few personal items with surprising care. They worked in silence, communicating through glances and subtle gestures, a choreographed dance they'd performed countless times. I stood in the center of my tiny apartment, watching my life being boxed up, and felt untethered. Who was I becoming? The woman who'd walked into that courthouse this morning felt like a stranger now. Everything had changed so fast. Constantine stood by the window, looking out at the street below. His phone rang twice. He answered in rapid-fire Russian, his voice low and dangerous. Whatever the conversations were about, they weren't good news. I caught words that sounded like threats, like warnings. When the last box was packed, we descended to the waiting SUV. My entire life fit into 6 boxes. 6 boxes for 29 years of living. The drive downtown took 20 minutes. The new building was in a completely different world. Sleek glass and steel. A doorman in an actual uniform. Security cameras covering every angle. The lobby had marble floors and modern art on the walls. People here looked different, confident, polished, like they'd never known what it meant to be afraid. Constantine's penthouse was on the 32nd floor. The elevator required a key card to access it. and opened directly into the apartment. I stepped out into a space that was easily 10 times the size of my studio. All exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. "This is too much," I breathed. "This is the guest suite," Constantine said. "My actual residence is upstairs. But you'll have complete privacy here. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, full kitchen. The building has 24-hour security, and my men will be posted on this floor." I turned to look at him. "You're not staying here?" "No, I have business to attend to." He checked his watch. "Expensive, probably worth more than I'd earned in a year at the bookstore. But I'll be back tomorrow to check on you. In the meantime, if you need anything at all, call this number." He handed me a card, different from the business card he'd given me at the courthouse. This one had only a phone number, embossed in silver. "What kind of business?" I asked. His smile was sharp, cold. "The kind that ensures Marcus Webb understands the consequences of what he tried to do today." A chill ran through me. "You're not going to hurt him." "I'm not going to lay a hand on him," Constantine said. And somehow that sounded more threatening than if he'd admitted to planning violence. "But he needs to understand that you are protected, that there are lines he cannot cross, that if he comes near you, if he so much as thinks about you, there will be consequences." He moved closer, and I could smell his cologne, leather, and smoke, and spice. His hand came up to my face again, that same tender gesture that seemed so at odds with everything else about him. "Rest, Claire. You're safe now. I promise you that. Promises seem to be important to you," I said softly. "They're everything to me." His thumb brushed my lower lip, and my breath caught. "I've broken a lot of rules in my life, hurt a lot of people, done things that would horrify you, but I have never broken a promise. Not once. And I won't start with you." Then he was gone, his guards following, the elevator doors closing with a soft chime that sounded like finality. I stood alone in the enormous apartment, surrounded by luxury I'd never dreamed of, and felt more confused than ever. I should be celebrating. I'd won. I was free. Marcus couldn't touch me anymore, but freedom was supposed to feel different than this. Lighter. Less complicated. It wasn't supposed to feel like I'd simply traded one powerful man's control for another's. I walked to the windows, pressing my palm against the cool glass, and looked out at the city sprawling below. Somewhere down there, Marcus was probably plotting revenge. Somewhere up there, Constantine was doing whatever dark things men like him did to protect their interests. And I was here, suspended between 2 worlds, belonging fully to neither. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. My heart seized, thinking it might be Marcus, but the message was short and in Russian. I ran it through a translation app. "Sleep well. You are watched. You are protected. You are mine." I should have been frightened, should have felt trapped. Instead, for the first time in 6 months, I felt the tight knot of fear in my chest begin to loosen. Whatever Konstantin Volkov was, savior or captor, protector or possessor, he'd meant what he said. I was safe, and somehow, that was enough. For now. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and, for a disorienting moment, didn't know where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The courthouse, Constantine, this penthouse that felt more like a dream than reality. I'd fallen asleep on the enormous couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes, too exhausted to even find the bedroom. My phone showed it was nearly noon. I had 7 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and 1 text message from the number Constantine had given me. "Lunch will be delivered at 1 p.m. Eat. K." Even his texts were commands. I showered in a bathroom that was larger than my old studio's kitchen, using products that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The hot water felt like a luxury I'd forgotten existed. When I emerged, wrapped in a towel that was impossibly soft, I found my boxes had been unpacked while I slept. My clothes hung in the closet, my books arranged on built-in shelves, my few personal items placed carefully on surfaces throughout the apartment. The intrusion should have bothered me, should have felt like a violation. Instead, it felt like being taken care of. Like someone had noticed I was too exhausted to do it myself and had simply handled it. I was pulling on jeans and a sweater when the doorbell rang. An actual doorbell, melodious and elegant. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a chef's coat holding several bags from a restaurant, whose name I recognized from magazine spreads about places I'd never be able to afford. I opened the door cautiously. I didn't order. Mr. Volkoff's standing order, ma'am, the man said with a professional smile. Where would you like me to set up? 20 minutes later, I sat at the dining table staring at enough food for 4 people. Gourmet sandwiches, salads with ingredients I couldn't pronounce, pastries that looked like art. The chef had arranged everything, provided serving suggestions, and departed with a slight bow that made me feel like royalty. I was picking at a salad when my phone rang. Constantine's number. Did you eat? His voice was rough, like he'd been up all night. I'm eating now. This is too much food. You're too thin. A pause. How did you sleep? Fine. I hesitated. Where are you? Handling things. Background noise suggested he was in a car. I'll be there in an hour. We need to talk. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what handling things meant in Konstantin Volkoff's world. I spent the next hour exploring the penthouse, trying to make sense of my new reality. Every room was perfectly appointed, decorated with the kind of taste that came from having unlimited resources and excellent advisors. But there were no personal touches, no photographs or mementos. It felt less like a home and more like a very expensive hotel suite. When the elevator chimed precisely 60 minutes later, I was waiting in the living room, nervous energy making it impossible to sit still. Konstantin emerged looking different than he had in court. He'd shed the suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves to reveal forearms corded with muscle, and marked with scars that told stories I probably didn't want to know. His hair was slightly disheveled, his jaw shadowed with stubble. He looked dangerous, exhausted. Real, Claire. His eyes swept over me, assessing, checking for, what? Damage? Fear? You look rested. You don't. I crossed my arms. What have you been doing? Ensuring your safety. He moved to the windows, looking out at the city with the air of a general surveying a battlefield. Marcus made some calls last night, tried to leverage some old connections to make trouble for you. I made certain those connections understood that would be inadvisable. By threatening them? By explaining reality, he turned to face me. Marcus Webb is finished in this city, Claire. His law firm asked for his resignation this morning. His country club revoked his membership. Several of his business associates have suddenly remembered prior commitments that prevent them from working with him. He's radioactive now, and everyone knows why. Because of you. Because he tried to destroy you. Konstantin's voice was hard. Because he thought he could abuse you, trap you, humiliate you in court, and face no consequences. I simply corrected that misunderstanding. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant even. Instead, I felt hollow. What about Veronica? A cold smile touched his lips. She left him last night. Apparently, being associated with a man who beats women and may have ties to murder isn't good for her social media brand. Despite everything, I laughed. It came out slightly hysterical, but it was real. So it's over? Just like that? Not quite. Konstantin's expression darkened. Marcus made one more call last night to a man named Viktor Sokolov. Do you know that name? I shook my head. Viktor is someone I have history with. Complicated history. He moved closer, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the carefully controlled anger. Marcus tried to make a deal, offered information about my business operations in exchange for Viktor's help in getting revenge on you. My blood ran cold. What kind of revenge? The permanent kind. His hand found my face, gentle despite the violence in his words. Viktor declined, not because he has any loyalty to me, but because I made him understand that touching you would start a war he cannot win. But the fact that Marcus tried means he's more dangerous than I anticipated. He's willing to go to people who would kill you without hesitation. So what do? We eliminate the threat. Konstantin's thumb traced my cheekbone. Permanently. You're going to kill him. It wasn't a question. No. His eyes met mine. But I'm going to make him wish I had. By the time I'm finished, Marcus Webb will be so completely destroyed that he'll spend the rest of his miserable life grateful I allowed him to keep breathing. There was something terrifying about the calm certainty in his voice. This wasn't rage or revenge, this was justice, executed with surgical precision by a man who'd probably done it 100 times before. I don't want you to become a monster because of me, I whispered. His laugh was bitter. Claire, I've been a monster for 20 years. Your father saw something in me worth saving, and I've tried to honor that. But what I am, what I've always been, is someone who protects what's mine. And you are mine now, whether you accept it or not. I'm not a possession. No. He stepped closer, crowding me against the window, his body radiating heat. You're far more than that. You're the daughter of the only man who ever showed me unconditional kindness. You're a woman who survived years of abuse and still found the courage to fight back. You're brave and smart and so goddamn beautiful it makes my chest hurt to look at you. His hand slid into my hair, tilting my face up to his. And you're under my protection, which means anyone who tries to hurt you has to go through me first. That's not possession, Claire. That's devotion. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. This is insane. I don't even know you. You know enough. His forehead rested against mine, his breath warm against my lips. You know I kept my promise to your father. You know I destroyed the man who hurt you. You know I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. What else do you need to know? Everything. My hands had somehow found his chest, feeling his heart beat as fast as mine. I need to know who you really are, what you really do. Why my father mattered so much to you that you'd upend your entire life for me. Constantine pulled back slightly, studying my face. Then he made a decision. I could see it in his eyes, the way something shifted and settled. Okay, he said quietly. I'll tell you everything. But first, there's someone you need to meet. He pulled out his phone, typed something, then pocketed it again. She's been wanting to meet you for a long time. She? The elevator chimed. Constantine moved to stand beside me. His hand finding the small of my back in that gesture I was learning meant he was preparing for something significant. The doors opened, and a woman stepped out. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled into a simple ponytail and the kind of quiet beauty that came from strength rather than artifice. She carried a baby, maybe 6 months old, with dark curls and enormous brown eyes. Claire Webb, Constantine said formally. This is Natasha Petrova and her daughter, Alexei. Understanding crashed over me like a wave. Alexei Petrov's wife, Natasha nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She said something in Russian, her voice thick with emotion. Constantine translated. She says thank you for helping bring justice to the man who destroyed her family. I didn't... My voice cracked. I didn't do anything. Constantine did everything. More Russian, and Constantine's expression softened in a way I hadn't seen before. She says you gave him the opportunity. That your courage gave him the weapon he needed. Marcus Webb's public destruction means people are asking questions about Alexei's death. The police have reopened the investigation. There may finally be justice. Natasha crossed to me, shifting the baby to one arm so she could take my hand. She spoke again, and this time I didn't need translation. The gratitude in her eyes, the way she squeezed my fingers, the tears that finally spilled over. It was a language beyond words. Constantine has been supporting us since Alexei died, she said in accented but clear English. He pays for apartment, for baby, for everything. He says is debt, but is more, is family. She looked at Constantine with such obvious affection that I felt a pang of something that might have been jealousy. But there was nothing romantic in the way he looked back, only the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd claimed responsibility for her safety. Alexei saved my life once, Constantine said quietly, when another associate tried to kill me over a disputed territory. He warned me, gave me time to prepare. It cost him Marcus's favor, made him a target, and I wasn't able to protect him when it mattered. So you protected his family instead, I finished. It wasn't enough. It's never enough. His jaw tightened. But it's what I could do, what I can still do. The baby, little Alexei, reached for Constantine with chubby hands, and he took her with surprising gentleness. She settled against his chest, playing with his collar, completely at ease. The contrast was striking. This dangerous man, this killer in expensive clothes, holding a baby with the careful tenderness of someone who understood exactly how fragile life was. Your father taught me that protecting people matters, he said, his eyes on the baby. That some debts transcend money or power. That family, chosen or blood, is worth more than empires. He looked up at me. That's who I am, Claire. That's what I do. I protect my family. Natasha stayed for another hour, drinking tea while little Alexei napped on the couch between us. She told me about her husband, his laugh, his dreams for their daughter, the way he'd tried so hard to be a good man in a world that didn't reward goodness. She told me how Konstantin had appeared at her door 3 days after Alexei's funeral, eyes full of guilt and fury, and promised that she would never want for anything. How he'd kept that promise every single day since. He is good man, she said firmly when she was leaving. Dangerous, yes, but good. He keeps promises. He protects family. You are lucky to have him. After she left, Konstantin and I stood at the windows again, watching the sun set over the city. The silence between us felt different now, less uncertain, more aware. That's what you were doing last night, I said. Making sure Natasha and the baby were safe. Making sure Marcus couldn't use them as leverage. Among other things, he was close enough that I could feel his warmth. I told you, Claire. I protect what's mine, and I'm yours. Yes. No hesitation. No apology. I turned to face him, studying this complicated, dangerous, surprisingly tender man who'd crashed into my life and changed everything. I'm not ready for whatever this is between us. I just got out of a marriage where I was controlled and hurt and made to feel small. I need time. Space. The freedom to figure out who I am without someone dictating it. I know. His hand came up to my face, that gesture becoming familiar, comforting. I'm not asking you to love me, Claire. I'm not even asking you to trust me yet. I'm just asking you to let me keep my promise. Let me protect you. Let me give you the space and time and freedom you need to heal. And if someday you decide you want more than that, he paused. I'll be here. I'll always be here. What if I decide I don't want more? What if I just want to be free? Pain flickered across his face, but his voice was steady. Then I'll still be here, protecting you from a distance, making sure you're safe, honoring your father's faith in me. You don't owe me anything, Claire. Not gratitude, not affection, not your presence. The debt is mine, not yours. I reached up, covering his hand with mine where it rested against my face. That's not fair to you. Life isn't fair. His smile was sad. If it was, your father would still be alive. Alexei Petrov would be watching his daughter grow up. You would never have met Marcus Webb, but we work with what we have, and what I have is the ability to protect you, to give you the life your father would have wanted for you. That's enough. What if it's not enough for me? The words surprised me even as I said them. What if I want to know more about you? Want to understand why looking at you makes me feel safe and terrified at the same time? What if I want to explore whatever this is, even though it's too soon and too complicated and probably a terrible idea? His eyes darkened, and I saw hunger there, carefully leashed, but present. Then we take it slow, at your pace, with your boundaries. I told you, Claire, I keep my promises. And I promise you this, I will never push you, never pressure you, never make you feel trapped or controlled. What we have, if we have anything, will be your choice. Always. That's a big promise. I don't make small ones. His thumb brushed my lower lip, and I felt heat pool in my stomach. But I mean it. You're free, Claire. Truly free. If you walk away right now, I'll let you go. I'll still protect you. Still make sure Marcus can't touch you. Still honor my debt to your father. But I won't chase you. I won't manipulate you. The choice is always yours. I believed him. Against all logic, against all my recent experience with powerful men making promises they didn't keep, I believed him. I'm not walking away, I said quietly. Not yet. But I need time. I need to figure out who I am outside of being Marcus's victim or your protected asset. I need to be just Claire for a while. Then be Claire. He released me, stepping back to give me space even though I could see the effort it cost him. Stay here as long as you need. Use the apartment, the security, the resources. I'll be here if you need me, but I won't crowd you. We can have dinner sometimes if you want. Talk, get to know each other like normal people. We're not normal people. His laugh was genuine, warm. No, we're really not. But we can try. Over the following weeks, we fell into a rhythm. Constantine would visit the penthouse most evenings. Always announced, never presumptuous. We'd have dinner, sometimes delivered by that same chef, sometimes takeout from neighborhood restaurants I'd never tried. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his childhood in Russia, the violence that had shaped him, the choices that had led him down a dark path. I told him about my mother, my father, the hole their deaths had left in my life. He never touched me beyond that gesture at my back, that hand on my face, never pushed for more, but the awareness between us grew with each conversation, each shared meal, each moment of comfortable silence. Marcus tried once to contact me. A desperate email that Constantine's security team intercepted. The message was rambling, accusatory, threatening legal action for defamation and conspiracy. Constantine handled it with a single phone call, and I never heard from Marcus again. I learned later that he'd moved to another state, taken a job with a firm that didn't know his history, and was apparently dating someone new, who, according to Natasha's updates, was too smart to put up with his bullshit. 3 months after the courthouse, I got a job at a small publishing house as an editorial assistant. It was entry-level, barely paid enough to cover my groceries, but it was mine. Something I'd earned, not something given to me by a powerful man. Constantine was pleased when I told him, his smile genuine and proud. "You don't need to work," he said over dinner that night. "The spousal support. I need to work." I interrupted. "I need to build something that's mine. You understand that, don't you?" "I do." He raised his wine glass in a toast. "To Claire Webb, editorial assistant. May your authors be talented and your deadlines forgiving." I laughed, clinking my glass against his, and felt something shift between us. We were finding our balance, learning how to be in each other's orbit without collision. It was Natasha who finally pushed me to acknowledge what was growing between us. She'd started visiting regularly, bringing little Alexei to play while we drank tea and talked. She'd become a friend, my first real friend in years. "You love him," she said bluntly one afternoon, watching me stare at my phone where a text from Constantine sat unopened. "Dinner tonight? I found a new Thai place you'd like." "It's complicated. Love always is." She bounced the baby on her knee, "but is simple too. He loves you. You love him. Everything else is just fear. I'm not ready to be in a relationship. I'm barely out of my marriage. So don't be in relationship," she shrugged. "Be in something else. Something you define. Something that's yours." She fixed me with a knowing look. "But don't run from it because you're scared. Run from Marcus was brave. Run from Constantine is just fear." That night, when Constantine arrived for dinner, I opened the door already knowing what I was going to say. "Hi," he said, holding up a bag that smelled amazing. "I brought pad thai and..." I kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't thought through. I just reached up, grabbed his collar, and pressed my lips to his. For a heartbeat, he was frozen in surprise. Then the bag hit the floor, probably ruining an expensive carpet, and his arms came around me, pulling me close as he kissed me back with a hunger that had been carefully restrained for months. He tasted like coffee, and want and promises kept. His hands were gentle despite their strength, one cupping the back of my head, the other at my waist. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "Claire, I don't know what this is," I said quickly. "I don't know if it's smart or healthy or if I'm ready, but I know I want to find out, with you. If you're willing to be patient with me, to let me set the pace, to understand that I might freak out sometimes." "Yes." He cut me off, his voice rough with emotion. "To all of it. Yes. I'm not promising forever. I'm not even promising tomorrow. I'm just promising to try. That's all I need." He kissed me again, softer this time, reverent. "That's everything." We ate cold pad thai on the couch, sitting too close, talking too little, just existing in the same space with this new thing between us acknowledged and real. His hand never left mine, his thumb tracing circles on my palm, a gesture that was becoming as familiar as breathing. "Your father would be happy," he said quietly, much later, when we were watching the city lights twinkle below. "To see you like this, safe, strong, free." "I think he'd like you," I replied. "Despite everything you are, everything you've done, he saw something worth saving in you. I think I'm starting to see it too. I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of that faith." He pulled me closer, and I let myself relax against him, feeling safe in a way I'd never thought I'd feel again. Yours and his. 6 months later, I moved my things out of the guest penthouse and into Constantine's apartment upstairs. Not because I had to, not because he demanded it, but because waking up without him felt wrong. Because his darkness balanced my light. Because sometimes, the most unexpected salvation comes from the most unlikely savior. Marcus Webb was eventually arrested on charges related to Alexei Petrov's murder. The investigation Constantine had pushed for had uncovered evidence that couldn't be ignored: emails, financial records, testimony from witnesses who'd been too afraid to speak before. He pled guilty to conspiracy and obstruction of justice, accepting a plea deal that gave him 10 years in prison. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was something. Natasha cried when I told her. Little Alexei, now over a year old and starting to walk, babbled happily, unaware that her father's murderer had finally faced consequences. "Thank you," Natasha said, hugging me tight. "Thank you for being brave, for letting Constantine help, for being family. Family." That's what we'd become. This strange collection of broken people held together by promises and protection and love earned in darkness. Constantine proposed on a Tuesday evening, nothing fancy or elaborate. We were cooking dinner together, or rather I was cooking while he watched, offering commentary and stealing tastes, when he suddenly pulled a ring from his pocket. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not because you owe me, not because you need my protection, but because I love you, and you love me, and life is too short and too uncertain to waste time pretending otherwise." The ring was beautiful, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, unique and unexpected, just like us. "Yes," I said without hesitation this time. "Yes." We married 6 months later, a small ceremony attended by Natasha, little Alexei, Constantine's guards who'd become friends, and a handful of people from my publishing house who'd become my chosen family. It wasn't the fairy tale wedding I'd imagined as a girl. It was better. Real, honest, built on a foundation of truth and trust earned through darkness. My father wasn't there to walk me down the aisle, but I felt his presence anyway, in the promises being made, in the man who'd honored a debt long after it should have expired, in the second chance at happiness I'd found in the most unexpected place. Konstantin Volkov had promised my father he'd protect me. He'd kept that promise. But somewhere along the way, protection had become partnership. Obligation had become devotion. And the man who'd appeared in that courtroom like an avenging angel had become simply the man I loved. Not despite who he was, but because of it. Because sometimes, salvation wears a dark suit and comes with armed guards. Sometimes, freedom looks like protection. And sometimes, the best promises are the ones kept long after the person who asked for them is gone. I was Claire Volkov now, safe, strong, loved, and finally, blessedly, completely free.